History brims with oppressive, self-serving, and indifferent people. But few of them were as bad as the notorious Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortés. Cortés exploited indigenous people in his quest for wealth and power, and his actions led to the demise of one of the most powerful empires in the Americas. So, today we're going to take a look at the most ruthless things Hernan Cortés did. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, leave a comment and let us know what other historical figures you would like to hear about. Okay, time to conquer some history. Not even your boss is as cold and cutthroat as the Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortés. Unless your boss is Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortés, in which case, run. You work for a zombie. Cortés arrived in the so-called New World in 1504. He was only 18 at the time, so when it came to being evil, he was a bit of an early bloomer. He served various roles in the colonial government of Hispaniola and Cuba, and quickly became an asset to Governor Diego Velázquez de Cuellar. Big-time villains helping politicians. Good thing that doesn't happen anymore. By the 1510s, however, Cortés was falling out of favor with the governor. Cortés was supposed to travel to present-day Mexico and explore it for possible conquest, but their dispute became so pronounced that Velázquez canceled the planned expedition. Sort of the "I'll turn this car around" of political machinations. If Cortés was the kind of man who followed orders, the history of Central America might look completely different right now. But he wasn't. Cortés defied the governor's command, gathered his men, supplies, and horses, and mutinously sailed from Cuba to the Yucatan in 1519. And that's why you don't hire big-time villains. Cortés and his 11 ships arrived on the Yucatan Peninsula about a month after his mutinous departure from Cuba. With him, he had only 530 soldiers, 100 sailors, and a small number of horses. So, in a dramatic gesture intended to make his intentions clear and annihilate his credit score for years to come, Cortés purposely destroyed his ships. There would be no turning back. Well, at least not for anyone who couldn't swim across the ocean. Once upon a time, the Aztec Empire was a thriving and highly developed civilization in Mesoamerica. Centered in what is modern Mexico, the Aztecs were a Nahuatl-speaking people whose network of alliances built an expansive empire with a complex religious, social, and cultural life. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, was one of the largest and most vibrant cities on Earth. And if you had something in your teeth, they'd tell you right away. Cortés quickly became acquainted with the local population on the Yucatan Peninsula, even acquiring 2 Spaniards who had been shipwrecked years before to serve as translators. He soon learned about the Aztec Empire's political tensions and rivals and used it to his advantage. He took on allies, most notably the Tlaxcalans, who wished to resist the Aztec. Divide and conquer works every time, especially on large pizzas. Longtime rivals with the Aztec city of Cholula, the Tlaxcalans persuaded Cortés to travel with them to the city to conquer its people. Cholula was the second largest and one of the most important Aztec cities of Mesoamerica, as well as one of the most sacred. The city's spiritual nature meant that the inhabitants kept only a very small army, instead choosing to rely heavily on the protection of the gods. Upon the arrival of Cortés and his troops, the unsuspecting priests and nobles of Cholula were rounded up in a square in front of the city's temple. Cortés and his men blocked all exits from the square, destroyed the unarmed citizens, and set fire to the city. In a matter of hours, the Spaniards and their allies had claimed anywhere from 3,000 to 30,000 lives. By 1521, following ongoing battles with Cortés's relentless forces, the Aztec Empire collapsed. Many factors contributed to the fall of the empire, including the advanced weaponry, armor, and horses used by Spanish troops, diseases unknowingly introduced by the Spanish, and short-sighted Aztec neighbors and rivals joining forces with the Spaniards. Sorry guys, that spinach is staying in your teeth. Although Aztec culture would adapt and survive in interesting ways, the fall of the empire marked the beginning of Spanish colonialism in modern-day Mexico, something that would have repercussions to this day. Hey there, weird historians! Are you too busy to cook this fall, but still want to eat like a king without spending a king's ransom? Help your budget out this month by getting Factor instead. Factor makes meeting your nutrition goals easy by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. Factor's team of gourmet chefs create each meal, using only ingredients with integrity to help you feel your best all day long. Most of us are busy during the week and don't have time to prep an entire meal. let alone shop for a bunch of ingredients. With Factor, skip the trip to the grocery store and skip the chopping, prepping, and cleaning up too, while still getting the flavor and nutritional quality you need. Not only is Factor cheaper than takeout, but meals are ready faster than restaurant delivery, in just 2 minutes. Factor helps you avoid takeout and keep your energy up with lunch to go. Effortless, wholesome meals like grain bowls and salad toppers that are ready to eat when you're on the go. No microwave necessary. Factor has over 34 weekly recipes to choose from for whatever you're craving and whatever your dietary preferences are, like this roasted veggie and pesto tortellini. The wide variety of options even include smoothies and juices for sensible snacking. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use the code WEIRD50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. That's factor75.com or click the link below and use the code WEIRD50. And now, back to the video. Prior to Cortez's arrival in Tenochtitlan, Aztec Emperor Moctezuma II was confused by a religious prophecy, and inadvertently anticipating the plot of the 2000 animated classic The Road to El Dorado, Moctezuma thought Cortes and his army were sent as divine messengers from the god Quetzalcoatl. He welcomed them warmly, a gesture he would absolutely come to regret. If only he'd had the comedic stylings of Kevin Kline and Kenneth Branagh to comfort him. Eventually, Cortes's motives became clear. Moctezuma realized he could no longer leave his house without some Spanish guy with a sword getting in his way, becoming a hostage in the imperial palace. Moctezuma then came to understand that Cortes was not a benevolent prophet, but a vicious soldier who imprisoned him to ensure the Aztecs would not resist Spanish conquest. Not that being mistaken for a deity didn't go to Cortes's head. Cortes saw himself as a religious servant in his conquest. Upon his arrival in Tenochtitlan, he immediately began his attempt to convert Aztecs to Christianity. And because he held Moctezuma as his prisoner, he had a pretty easy go of it. Something tells us it didn't involve singing Hello from Book of Mormon. Cortes forced Moctezuma to replace statues of Aztec gods in the city's temple with the Virgin Mary and Saint Christopher, and had a cross installed on top of the pyramid. Moctezuma relented because, in addition to being a prisoner, Cortes threatened to annihilate the temple priests if his demands were not met. That's what negotiators might call a lose-lose situation. From Cortes's perspective, imprisoning Moctezuma was a pretty good plan. For a while. Until, with their emperor as Cortes's prisoner, the Aztec nobles became restless and angry with the undue influence held by the Spaniards. To try and break the hold Cortes had over their political structure, they elected a new leader for themselves while the conquistador was away from the city. Meanwhile, the Spaniards in charge while Cortes was away disrupted a traditional festival held by the Aztec people, slaying nobles and inciting a riot. Upon Cortes's return, he attempted to regain control of the Aztec people by directing Moctezuma to address the crowd surrounding the palace. But the people were not buying it. During this address, Moctezuma was booed and pelted with stones, sustaining serious injuries as a result. The captive ruler was trapped in an impossible situation, and at this point he'd pretty much run out of friends. But he wouldn't be trapped for too much longer because Moctezuma perished a few days later. The cause of his death remains unclear, but historians continue to speculate based upon colonial accounts and illustrations. Some believe that he died from all those stones he got hit with. Others suggest Cortes may have had the emperor whacked once it was clear that he no longer had power over the Aztec people. Either way, it doesn't exactly take Columbo to figure out who was ultimately responsible for Moctezuma's untimely fate. Cortes. After Moctezuma had left the building, so to speak, Cortes and his men were pushed out of the city. He clearly overstayed his welcome. However, the diseases Cortes and his men left proved to be the most effective means of destroying the Aztecs. Smallpox decimated the city over the course of 70 days in the fall of 1520. It had been a deadly threat amongst indigenous populations in the Caribbean for years, but Cortes's army likely brought the disease into Tenochtitlan. At the epidemic's worst, mortality rates may have been as high as 90%, with significant depopulation and reduced food supplies soon to follow. Sounds like smallpox isn't the right word. Maybe it should be huge pox. Though devastating to the Aztecs, the smallpox epidemic was a boon for Cortes. He was able to lay siege to the city, and Tenochtitlan fell in August of 1521, after weeks of bloody warfare. Both the Spanish and their indigenous allies looted the city, causing mass devastation. Once Cortes conquered Tenochtitlan, he immediately began to transform it into a European city. Aztec culture was actively suppressed. including language, religion, and education. As part of this edict, he also introduced a social framework called encomienda, a system of land granting in which the local population was enslaved and exploited by a ruling class. So he basically invented the Hunger Games before the Hunger Games. Cortes's oppressive and cruel treatment of the indigenous people eventually prompted Spanish historian and missionary Friar Bartolomé de las Casas to outwardly protest and critique the entire system. So even Cortes's contemporaries thought he was a pretty bad dude. When choosing a husband, it's important to think about whether your suitor has a sense of humor, loves spontaneous trips, or is the kind of man who could slaughter tens of thousands of people. If he's that last one, consider that a red flag. Cortes's wife probably should have. While in Cuba, Cortes married Cuba Governor Velázquez's sister-in-law, Catalina Juarez. After the conquest, Catalina arrived in New Spain. She shared an awkward marriage with Cortes because she was related to the Cuban governor, with whom Cortes no longer got along. Sort of like Meet the Parents, if Ben Stiller had been trying to unite two powerful 16th century houses. Eventually, Cortes became discouraged with Catalina when she bore him no children. Meanwhile, he had a number of mistresses, including an indigenous woman called La Malinche, who served as his guide and interpreter and was forced to bear a son for him. Because while Cortes was racking up crimes against humanity on his rap sheet, he figured, why not add a few more? In 1522, Catalina died under mysterious circumstances. As the man with the most to gain by Catalina's death, Cortes immediately fell under suspicion. A formal inquiry was launched, but as you might expect, it was inconclusive, and Cortes was never found guilty. If there was a crime he couldn't get away with, he never found it in his lifetime, and he was really looking. So what do you think? Which of Cortes's many misdeeds was the most foul? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.